about, I looked up um, the balance had a job list recently of all the job boards that they said that were the best. And let me see if I can get a hold of it. But one of the things that I thought about, and I want to read, these are the top 10 websites they consider for jobs. Um, and it's in order. And the top one they consider best overall is Indeed.com.
Mhm.
Then comes Monster, Glassdoor, FlexJobs, The Ladders, Angel List, LinkedIn, Linked Up, Scouted, and Snag a Job. Those are the balance considers. Now, everybody's going to have a different list for different reasons. Um, I think one of the things that the reason why Indeed comes to mind, it's huge. and but yet they consider Monster not that far behind as far as the number of jobs experienced. However, us reading the top 10 of all those top tens, uh, those and there's like hundreds more job boards that you could possibly be on. Um, they are only make up a fraction. Uh, 20, 25, if we're generous, we're giving 30% of all the jobs available in the world are on those job boards. And I looked up and I was checking to see if I saw a recent study, and I think Job Bite has agreed with some of the statistics I had. There was an NPR article from back in the day where they gave them 20%, where they were all the jobs that are available. So as we talk about this, I just want to send a little context that we're not saying job boards are bad. We're
Mhm.
not saying
Mhm.
that. We're saying that they're okay and that they have useful information. And I think one of the things that probably has come up over the past week or so, as people uh, have approached this, is that internationally, um, the look is a little bit different. I'm not sure what the scope of that is. Um, it might be a larger percentage internationally, but might differ per country. So each of these sites also has an international reach. And of course, whenever you go on the web, you're going to see whatever's available internationally. So all that being said, we're we're trying to give the better strategy. And I think we ended really well last week when we talked about we were really getting to the strategic part. And I really like to continue with that, Damien, if that's okay.
Sure.
It talked about strategies outside of the job boards or a way to use job boards a little bit more creatively. One thing we didn't hit on as much last week, but we touched on a little bit, is our niche job boards, and meaning that there are specific niches. If you're an engineer, if you're a chemist, or if you're a scientist, if you're a writer, if you have a specific job boards. Now that might have they will have different jobs because of the particular industry. But having said that, they don't even have all the jobs are in that industry
Mhm.
because they're only going to cater to a certain audience. And maybe you can shed some light on what your experience is as far as job boards and the way that employers think when they're putting them on the board and they're making it available towards to people. And maybe they're after certain people, but they're making it kind of a broad stroke. But it's kind of like casting a wide net to only catch groupers or perch in a sense.
Well, perch is my
Go ahead.
favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say catfish is fine, but
Ah. Uh, well, Cradle Catholic, Fridays in Lent, fried perch. I
right,
mean,
right. I'm with you. I'm with you all the way. Either one.
um, my experience has been, for instance, there was a major bank in town
Hmm.
that constantly was looking for information technology folks.
Hmm.
They would post it on their site. They would post it on Indeed, but where they would really weigh heavily is dice.com, because that is the niche site for information technology.
Hmm.
And excuse me, and many people that came through professionals in transition went to this bank through positions that they saw on Dice. And again, it was specialty, but at the very beginning, I'd like to say when it comes to job boards, those are only a guide. If you see a position on a job board, whether it's broad stroke like Indeed or niche like Dice, be sure to go to the company's website and apply there for two or three very good reasons. One, if it's not on the company's website, then that means that they've taken the position down, but yet it's still maybe up on the sites. So you're just wasting your time. Two, sometimes the description on the company's site actually may be more robust, so you can get a better feel for what it entails. And three, you're not going to waste your time going after things that aren't going to be there. And then the other thought is, if you go there looking for the position that was listed, there is a chance that they may have just listed that day or the day before positions that haven't yet hit the job boards. So, you can use job boards as a guide, but use the company's website as the place to apply. And the other thing is, many times you'll see the position, you'll click on the position, you'll go to another website where you have to fill out information, and then you see the position. And what you've done is you've just added your name to another company's not company, but another website's contact information. And then you'll start to get bombarded by that website in addition to the website where you found it originally. So, go direct, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked about a little bit last week how it's better to get direct through a person than it is
Oh,
this particular job site. And, and,
mhm.
and not to confuse, we're trying to cover both sides of the spectrum here. If you make a decision to go one or the other, but I think what it comes down to, people in doing the work, they should take the road less traveled, so to speak. It's a better, it increases your percentage of and your opportunity, rather than to take the road that's really narrow and a lot of people are trying to get in it. If, in other words, if you're going through a job board, it lessens your chances because there's so many people. It's such a crowded entity. It's hard to stand out, and sometimes even those are timed. And we could talk a little bit about this too, whether it's a good idea to be one of the first to get through once you see a posting or not. And those experiences have varied. Um, I remember back in the day, and I don't mean to switch gears too quick, but I think it's relevant here. Um, Back in the day, when you did a job board, the first thing you do is you wake up on Sunday. You get the Sunday paper where it had the mass amount of jobs.
Mhm.
And then that's how you apply to the job. You're going to apply to that job because Sunday morning you want to be first, and the early bird gets the worm. And back at that particular time, since a lot of people weren't using the net, you got looked at more.
Mhm.
You didn't have 5 million people on Sunday looking for a job in the job board, looking for a job boards to apply to, or to fax in your resume, which people are still doing that apparently. And I'll tell the story. My wife has a client that she works with very closely. As part of her retirement, she still remains active in the healthcare field. And so she has a client, and client want her to fax information. I still have a fax app on my iPhone, $6.99, just to fax. Yes, just to fax 2 sets of information a week, only because that client doesn't want to their head refuses to come into the 21st century. All
Wow.
that being all that being said, you're not going to find that many people who are going to want that information via fax anymore. They're going to want an email scanned, or they'll have you apply to a job board. But having said that, be prepared for any way that the employer wants you to have it if you really want to work for them. If you're, of course, if you're in the technology space, you pretty much, you've gone on. But I know some people are kind of looking for anything, so they're willing to do anything. Just to let you know, the fax app still is there. It's just $6.99 a month. So, but also, and I'm rambling a little bit. All this is to say is that you've got to kind of be aware of the different ways that a company may have you apply. Because the company may have you apply one way on their site and another way on the job board. Because there are times when they'll ask for you to go ahead and email your resume as opposed to sending it through a job board through their ATS on their site. There are times when they'll have it done a different way on Indeed or Monster, whoever they have on. So you want to definitely pay attention to those kind of things. And if you're going to use a strategy like that, again, you've got to be mindful that you got one chance to get it right or get excluded. That's a job board for you.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to what you said just a little bit ago about how much more effective going through another person can be. Last night at the Professionals in Transition meeting, during the first part of the meeting, people kind of self-report or share information that is for the good of the group. And Mark said that I have an interview today. And it was because of a work buddy that he reported to 2 companies before that was working for this medical pharmaceutical company in Lenoir, North Carolina. And they are busting at the seams with growth. Glad somebody's growing quickly. And so I guess they were in a leadership meeting and they were talking about the finance area and the need to bring on, someone who really knew what they were doing. And so at the end of the meeting, he went to the president and mentioned Mark's name, all unbeknownst to Mark. And lo and behold, a couple of days ago, he gets a call, not from his friend, not from human resources, but from the CEO of the company saying, hey, why don't you come down? I'd just like to meet you and talk about issues and share a little bit about the finance department, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there just happens to not be a chief financial officer there, but he never told him that. He did his, like you say, detective work, and through Mark, through their website, through Glassdoor, he got a kind of an overall picture of what he was going into. But here's the interesting part, Mark. The CEO never asked him for a resume, never asked him for a list of references. He said, why don't you come down and we'll just talk? And so Mark is there right now having this open-ended discussion with the CEO first, and then he'll work down the organization for a position like you were talking about, a position that hasn't even been posted. It could be a month from now before the position is posted, or perhaps, they'll post it inside the organization, knowing that there is nobody in that organization now that could fill those shoes. So they have done their part in terms of requirements. And then, if everything works and Mark feels good about the culture and vice versa, then, hopefully he'll slide into a CFO position that arrived to his doorstep through his good reputation from somebody he worked for 2 positions ago, which builds into exactly what you were saying about more effective ways than job boards to find positions.
Yeah, and that is the best way, is to be able to go in with the confidence and, of course, the intelligence, and having the right intelligence. I mean, if you can also overstep, in a sense that maybe you were once a CEO and you're taking a step down, you might be looked at a little bit differently, because there are times when the CEO or a manager may look at a candidate and realize that that person has a whole lot more experience than you do, or the hiring manager does, and they may pass based on that. Wow, they feel that they can't manage that person. In this particular case, it sounds like this person had the right experience per his friend, and because of his friend, on the reputation of his friend, and obviously the person referring him, I'm sure, had a great reputation as well.
Yes.
So he got a chance to skip the line, and this is what I mean. This totally disrupts the hiring process for most companies. Is that you get to meet with the CEO, you get to meet with the decision maker, and even if the decision maker happens to make you go through the channel still, and that happened to me once, the likelihood of you getting hired is based on the recommendation of the CEO. If they turn you down, they better find a really good reason not to hire you. So basically, you're going through the formalities, and you still got to be impressive. You still got to keep impressing all the way through, as if you were interviewing up. And in fact, you could even interpret that the CEO really relies on the opinions of the people that are reporting to him. Mm-hmm. And but when somebody hears something and you got their ear, it creates an opportunity. And there's thousands of stories like that. There was a story, it's sort of like mine, is where I still interviewed up, but it was somebody that was in upper management that recommended me ultimately. Mm-hmm. So that, the decision, I was able to disrupt dozens and dozens of candidates within that process, because I already know the top decision maker of that particular division. So, and I think a lot of people have stories like that. I do want to get to Nayland's inquiry. And this is kind of a sidebar. I think it's going to relate, though, is that is knowing another language an advantage when applying to a new job position? Interesting question. And I have my thoughts about it. Damian, your take on it?
I think it's a definite plus. I think it depends on the position that you're applying for. So, for instance, if your company does a lot of offshore manufacturing and you walk in the door and you know Mandarin, you're going to be a hero, because 99.9% of Americans do not know Mandarin. If you are going to be doing a lot of interfacing with if the Hispanic community is a critical customer and you're in marketing, then knowing Spanish is a huge plus because it can save you massive marketing errors, like what was done with the hosiery company that I used to work for, where someone who didn't know Spanish just the right way approved of all their advertising, billboards, packaging, the whole 9 yards, only to find out on rollout that when the big advertising started, the verbiage that they used, the word was a swear word or something that was so extremely uh, poor that they ended up having to take a massive write-off and recall everything, cancel advertising, and what have you. If that person truly knew the language and the culture, the whole thing could have been avoided. So bottom line is, to me, it's a plus.
It's a plus if the company needs it in short, if they have
Yes.
a need for it. And the new world of work, I think, is going to be full of companies with different people who can speak different languages. It would
Mm-hmm.
be um, better for a lot of them, and it may come to this, being that the world is only divided by a camera on the computer or an email that could be quickly sent in moments. That large companies that like Amazon and Facebook, you're going to have all types of people that work with you all around the world. Having said that, there are going to be those who don't. And probably you want to start looking at to see what position you're going to be holding and see how it's going to translate. In other words, it can't be just solely based on you speaking another language. Even though that's a plus and they can train for skill,
Mm-hmm.
you could definitely train for skill, but they may not be able to train for language. And there might be a fine line where there are dialects that might be different, where if Spanish it has different dialects and from different places, so one word in one area is not going to cover the whole Hispanic community around the world. It may be different in Brazil, it may be different in Spain. So how they test for that, I'm sure we'll see even more testing if it doesn't exist already. That person knows the language of that area. It's the same way if you're African and there's like dozens of African languages. So somebody can't say, well, we need somebody to address the African population. You didn't know what specific language, and they're divided often by tribe. You got to know that tribal language as well, depending upon how far it reaches. I know we're getting deep into it, but I think there's a lot of questions you'll also need to ask. You need to be sure that there are other people other than you that are being hired to interpret,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes bias plays in, no matter what your nationality. If you're going into a all-white organization and you're the only Hispanic person, but you're there to speak the Spanish to everybody else, that doesn't mean you're going to be treated like royalty. There will be some differences and indifferences. So you got to be prepared for you to ask those particular questions. So it's an advantage, and yes, it's impressive. Again, ultimately, um, they're going to analyze whether is it for the greater good of the company to reach the greater good of their clients and their customers and whoever they're serving. So Elaine Santiago, thanks for asking this question. It is so difficult to interview for a job when you have the right skills, but not the specific industry experience. Any thoughts on this? That's a great question, and I think that's a fair question as well. Is it difficult to get an interview for a job when you have the right skills but not the specific industry experience? Any thoughts on this? I have a couple of thoughts, and I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. You have to be ready, and you should get to know a company well enough to know how they're going to accept your set of skills, and look at what they emphasize in those job postings. Now, when you go, it's a great way to use a job board to find out at least the initial information, and what they prefer and what they require and what may be open. Now, if you got a reference and if you have the preferred, not the required, I would say try to get in. And that might be a good fit depending on the culture and everything else, if there's an agreement, because that's what it should be. Being hired should be an agreement. But if you have the right skills, but not the specific industry, if you have general skills that might fit any industry, you'll have to you'll have to measure, whether get to know the company more and know how to fit in there before you have an interview, would increase your chances. And that takes getting to know a whole lot of other people and have a whole lot of other conversations. Damien, your take on that question?
Sure. Very quickly, the when you switch industries, and I went from pots and pans because I was a cookware buyer to mops, brooms, and brushes, which is how I got to North Carolina, uh, to what was then my next area of expertise, which was bras and panties. Um, I every time sold my the various companies I worked for on transferable skills. And if you are moving into another field altogether, your sell job is twice as hard. But if you can demonstrate how your transferable skills meet the needs of the position as effectively as you can, you're not going to have everything, then the likelihood that you would go on to the next level of interviewing would certainly go up. Because I think Mark said this a couple of minutes ago. You can't train a good attitude into a person. You can't train hardworking, hungry, willing to learn, sense of urgency. All of those things, those come from the inside out. But you can learn different skill-based things that are part of your a part of your job. So demonstrating that you have the right stuff and the willingness to learn will help you immensely. And the bottom line is, if I can learn about bras and panties, others can make additional switches in areas of expertise.
Excellent. I would say, to even sum it up even more, companies can't train personality, but they can train skills.
Mhm.
So I would say, if you can grab an understanding of the MO of the type of personalities, I would say the other consideration you could make to add on to that is to find out, how do people learn the job? And does it match your learning style? And there's a different learning style. I mean, to do engineering is one thing, to do law is another. And even though they may have some common skill sets, they also have some common learning development abilities that are needed. And I can almost guarantee you, in engineering, well, in both, you'll need to learn fast, but you'll need to also, it's not always the speed. Can you can you read and get the information one time? Where, where a lot of lawyers excel, and they read and write real well, because that's basically what they do all day. The engineer doesn't do that all day, but they know how to write, but they take a little bit more time to dissect the details. And they approach and their approach to a job and what their skills are completely two different things. And that's where I think you need to look at, is to see how do people ask people that you network with. Maybe you could find some companies, you should find companies you should target, and just don't look at the broad industry. That might help you whittle down your job search a little bit, instead of looking broadly and relying on the job board, because job boards don't differentiate. They just tell you what you need to basically get in the door, but you need to look at the second and third tier, um, aspects of the job, like what kind of culture, uh, what are the expectations, is the turnaround time very quick, do you get to take your time when you're talking to their clients or dealing with a project to make sure it's accurate, or do you have to have it fast and accurate? That can completely disrupt your ability to not just get the job. Let's say you do get the job, but to survive in the job is also a concern as well. That you want to stay at the job and leave when you want to, and not be a tryout, not for you to be an audition. Although that's not always bad, but that may be discouraging if it happens more than one time. Did you have anything to add to that, Damon?
I think what you said is great.
Okay, okay, all right, very good. So I think, based on some of the questions, I think some people, I think going back to Nalen's question also, we have people, uh, watching from other countries.
Mhm.
And Nalen was from Toronto. So Canada is an entirely different way, because a lot of people want to be a transplant. They want to find a job in Canada, and they want to, and the first thing that they do, they go to a job board, they find a job, but that's not particularly their first step. And so I would say, if you're from another country, you need to find out what the standards are of being a citizen in that company.
Mhm.
Now, I know in Canada, in talking to a couple of friends of mine on a podcast, they look at the different positions and different professions that people come over. You may be accepted a whole lot quicker if you're a nurse or a doctor than if you were an electrician. Now, if you're
Mhm.
electrical engineer, we might be able to argue that time. If you have some other careers, that translates automatically to other times. But there's some positions that are just American based. If you're customer service, uh, you might have a little bit more time, because you don't have a skill that's an immediate need in that particular country. So it may take a little bit longer. So looking on a job board may not be your first step in going to a international country, especially if you're going to Canada. There's a flow and there's a way to do things, and you have to do it in those particular orders, in that particular order. Do you want to add on to that? I'm sure you've had international clients before.
Um, Both going to foreign companies and coming
Okay.
into the United States,
Hmm.
just something to think about. Unless you're in a high demand position, like Mark said, nurse, doctor, or a place where there's truly a shortage of workers, my experience has been that employers will give preference to those that are Canadian citizens and are geographically close to wherever the facility is that they're hiring, for very much the same reasons that the United States would do that.
Hmm.
Um, because if you are local, then you don't have to pay for relocation costs. Um, and then on the flip side, there have been a number of folks that have come into the United States, again, many in information technology, that have been given their green card, and then all of a sudden their positions are eliminated, and that green card was sponsored by the corporation that let them go. And that also opens up a whole can of worms, but that's,
Yes, it does.
for another day, another discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And again, you want to be well versed on how that country accepts people coming to their land to take jobs that some companies and some countries may feel is like that job for those citizens. But Canada is kind of a little bit different because they're kind of like the melting pot of the world in some respect, that they have many different nationalities and
Mhm.
many people coming from many different countries in there. They have, when I went to Toronto years ago, I remember it was like 1989. I believe it was like 1989. I went, and um, it was in May of 1989, and they only had 4 murders at that time in that country. I say that to say that uh, Canada and other countries, but particularly Canada, have a high standard. So they're not letting just anybody to come walk through and to be as disruptive as they want to. It's a whole lot different than the United States, where we do welcome for the most part. And over the years, anyone. Their culture is a little bit different. They don't, and they have things in place that look like that, and that's what they want to keep. And that's what they've kept throughout the years, is that they don't have that kind of disruption, uh, and don't allow it in their place. So let's talk a little bit about the application online. And I do want to address something that's really, I think a lot of people have questions about, is the salary aspect of it. People get online, they get to the salary report, and the application won't let them go any further unless you fill out that salary part. And that's where a lot of people have questions, or they wonder what they should do. And they hear a lot of advice about whether you should put a number there or not, or something another. And a lot of them won't let you go. That's why, going back to what our original premise are, there are more useful strategies better, so you don't have to deal with that when you first get in, because many times the salary is the only deal breaker when somebody applies. If that they bid too high or don't bid at all, they get tossed out. They become eliminated. It was very rare that they'll get through, but they're within whatever the range is, or they put a number there. Even if they put $1, it will look a little bit strange, but at least that gets through. But I think a lot of people want to be honest and be transparent, but a lot of times salary is kind of the timing thing. You want to talk about it right at the right time, not when you first get in the company, especially when the company doesn't post the salary requirements.
Another way to get around it is to put in all nines and then expect a call from human resources saying, you're not making under $1 million a year, are you? And then the response was, no, I'm not. And then the question is, well, why didn't you fill in your salary? And the answer is, I think it's a little premature to discuss salary before we even have an interview. And to your point, sometimes it works great because human resources reaches out to you, and other times it doesn't, and they put your application aside. But you're never going to know. And investing 80% of your time uh, outside of job boards produces much quicker, tangible benefits than spending day in and day out doing nothing but applying online, because you're leaving your future open and in the hands of applicant tracking systems whenever you apply online. And that's software. A human being may never see your application or your cover letter if you don't understand applicant tracking systems and how to write a cover letter and fill out an application correctly.
Yeah, yeah, and just for argument's sake, I think most people can gather how to do it for a human eye, and and that's what you want to write as a human. Uh, and we'll all face the frustration of even sending through a resume and they still asking you to fill out an application. That's pretty it's pretty frustrating. Um, but similarly, the whole idea of again, you're looking for more conversations than you are, spending your time in the black hole of a application process, which many times it may seem, because there are well qualified candidates that don't see the light of day because
Mhm.
they're always applying to the black hole,
Mhm.
as opposed to you take somebody who might be lesser qualified but got a referral from someone that they know, that the company may even know, like, and trust. You can at least get a meeting of some sort. So
Mhm.
I think that's where some of the you know people have a conundrum, and then to being able to write the application, be able to comply with every spot, because the salary isn't the only problem for a lot of people. They're going to be asked redundant questions that are already on your resume, or they're redundant but they're asked differently. uh, um, you know, there's a difference between how long you were with the company, and how long were you in that position, and that could be answered several different ways. So even though the position is a little bit different, their intention is they want to know your experience within that company, and if you're stable. And there's different ways that people will approach it, but all in all, you're hoping that whatever your answer is going to be not particularly the right answer, but be the answer that they're willing to live with and look for.
Mhm.
Comments about that?
Just that sometimes as you go from application to application, you're going to notice common themes. And what one person at Professionals in Transition did was create a TXT file, right? So it's
Hmm.
basically unformatted. And then he found that by copying and pasting that information into the application, depending on what type of application was, I mean, if it will accept a paste, that he found the application process quicker. And then one other thought, and that is um, the the beauty of taking the time to self qualify for a position that you really qualify, that isn't a hope, wish, and a prayer, it's a huge time saver. Because I've had PIP members tell me that these days it can take anywhere from a half an hour to 2 hours to fill out an application, depending on the company. And if there is a personality test that's tacked on to the very end that you must complete before your application can go into the company. And so if you're spending that much time on one application, it just makes sense that you only spend your time on positions that you really have a shot at.
Yeah. And I don't know if we talked about it last week, but I've talked about it before on other shows, how the federal government has a much lengthier application process. And this is important to know because you might have a shot at a federal government job, but you have to be prepared for filling out their online application. They require you to do that, and also send your resume. And each of the fields, like most of they have character requirements, and you might not be able to apply through unless you comply with those particular character uh, those character counts, but they also have to be grammatically correct. They
Mhm.
also, those free spaces, they have to be, excuse me, in a way, they have to be phrased in a way that, again, they're going to want, they want a human to be able to decipher it. I know people try all kinds of tricks with that, and it doesn't necessarily particularly work. But you're going to use a resume, and resume could be about 25 pages, it could be 2 pages, but they want to know all of your history. They want to know everything when you're applying to a federal job. That rule is going to still apply. It's better to get, if you apply, try to find somebody to recommend you, and that's a much lengthier uh, um, process,
Mhm.
because it could take several months. And I want to talk about for a quick second, but somebody did ask, Elaine, thanks for asking, Elaine, where do you find federal government jobs posted for the United States? It's usajobs.gov. Um, you can also use complementary tools, ONET. I think it's onet.com, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I've used it, but that's a complementary part. I would say take a look at both, but use usajobs.gov to apply for American federal jobs. Canadian jobs is another site. I forgot what that is currently, but it's different around the world. The different types of federal jobs around the world, and you want to be aware, and they are hiring currently, so that's what you want to make. But back to the application process for USA Jobs, um, you want to consider too that they may ask for more references than civilian jobs and private jobs. I've heard people use up to 7 references for a job these days, and that varies. And I don't think everybody's asking for that many, but I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, there we go. On onet dot onetonline.org. Thank you. And you can always look for onet in the search engine. You can find uh, find that particular listing. Thanks, Damien. Uh, did you want to add on to that, because there's another area I do want to hit as well before we wrap up?
Just a question that you might know the answer to. When I filled out my uh, U.S. government paperwork, I can't remember, it was either 7 or 9 pages, but you only had to fill it out once and then you could apply for multiple jobs. Do you know if that's still true?
I don't know if that's still true. I used to know that, but the answer was back in 2011 and 2012, yes.
Okay.
Uh, Now I'm not so sure.
Okay.
My bet is it hasn't changed a whole lot.
That's what I
Maybe
was thinking.
if there's a career coach who works with who works with the federal government, if you can answer that question, I'll give you a shout out if you want to put that in the thread to answer Elaine's question, or get a hold of Elaine. But I think the other people want to know. We may do a follow up about that in future episodes. But one thing that I'm learning, and maybe you're learning, you got an example where somebody completely disrupts. I got an email from somebody that follows me pretty closely, and he usually works the C-suite or leadership positions, and he was telling me that there's a trend, and this is not the first time I've heard of it, where he's had 10 interviews, didn't get the job, but he was compensated for his time. He was given $100.
Wow.
I found that interesting. I also found it interesting a few months ago that someone had several different job interviews, um, and they were paid for, I think, for a day's worth of time, being that they had
Wow.
one. So I thought that was very interesting trend. that is heading our way. I'm beginning to hear more of that the more times have gone on. In fact, there was somebody in the job lab that actually they got paid for some time that they spent. I think very often people have um, aren't prepared for, and really some of us who spreads this information, we're not prepared to how to handle 10 job interviews. But I find that fascinating. Is that something that have you seen that trend ever of
Uh,
that many interviews and then you don't get the job, but at least you get a thank you $100 for applying.
I've heard of, 6 interviews and not getting the position. Uh, but the trend of paying people for their time has not made it down here yet. I sure hope it does, because that recognizes the person's time and as an individual, as opposed to just, I hate this term, human capital.
Right, right, yeah. I think i think i think people really need to really consider, and I think this is really, it really says something, that even though we're in a market where um, there's a lot of imbalance, I won't call
Mhm.
it and say, but we'll just call it imbalance, where there's industries that are hiring a lot of folks and the industries that are not, that
Mhm.
candidates are going to start looking at how they're respected and how
Mhm.
they are considered their time. And the company that doesn't is going to lose out on the better talent. Now there'll always be somebody who will come from a place of need and desperation, and I understand that because
Mhm.
everybody has been there at one time or another. But I think that there'll be people who will need to consider, if uh, you want to leverage your ability to be a wanted candidate, that you want to avoid relying on the job board. And again, we talk about reliance as opposed to using it for information or using it to at least start the process and somebody follows up behind it. But I really think that's a very interesting trend that companies are looking at that way. Or in this particular case, this is somebody who is vying for a leadership position. I don't know how they'll treat the rank and file. That
Yeah.
remains to be seen. But both these times were leadership or high level professionals, um, and them having realizing that they do have somewhat of a leverage, or that they want the word to be spread that they're a company that respects my time, even though I
Right.
didn't get the position. Your thoughts on that?
I agree. Absolutely. And we're going to get through the pandemic. We're going to come out on the other side. And you really only get one chance to make a great impression. And by recognizing the person who was interviewed for that leadership position, even with a nominal amount of money compared to what they would have been paid if they were working,
Sure.
uh, it it makes a huge impression, and it's the best form of advertising that's out there, because he's going to tell everyone that he knows how good this company was, even though he didn't get the position. And if you've had a good interview or interviews with a company and you don't get the position, bear in mind, send them a thank you note and kind of keep them top of mind, because in many cases, uh, especially after 90 days, if that person doesn't work out, or if there are other similar openings in the organization,
Mhm.
you leave them with an outstanding impression. Guess what? They're going to think of you and call you back. And I've seen that happen with my own 2 eyes many times, with terrific people that end up going back to work, or going to work rather, at one of their target companies, because they got turned down for a position, you know, 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, yeah. Because you got turned down doesn't mean you need to blow up the bridge. For
Exactly.
sure, you need to consider that you might find them. In fact, there have been times when people got turned down from jobs that they end up working with them as a client, and then end
Yes.
up
Mhm.
working for that company. I've seen that happen before. That becomes and work for that company in spite of having of signing a non-compete agreement, which is even more funny, which is a whole nother discussion. Maybe in the future we can have, you know, I'll have to see if one of my employment lawyer friends would come on and
Yeah.
answer that question.
Good.
Uh, I'm talking about you, Tom Spiegel. How, shout out to Tom, who also lives in North Carolina, I believe. But nevertheless, final thoughts before we wrap it up for the day.
Other than, you know, plan your day, stick to your plan, um, find ways to have the internet work for you
Mhm.
as opposed to you working for the internet, and find as many ways as possible to reach out to people, mainly through LinkedIn. Um, don't be afraid to update people on your progress, and whoever your references are, feed and nourish them throughout your process so
Mhm.
that when you do give them your name, they have a whole kind of scope of things that you have been doing in OPS. You can say, hey, when they call, emphasize this, 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 and this. But again, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah,
But thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here.
yeah, no, no, no. This is your house too. Uh, we, speaking about names, and I think I said this last time, but I think it's worth mentioning again that you should Google your name first
Yes.
before you start applying and writing a resume, and whatever name you find that where it will stick out, whether it's John L. Smith or John Leonard Smith, uh, look at those names and see which one will give you the path to a narrower path to being recognized, because you want your name to be recognized all over, and use that name on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile, on conferences, or meetups, online, offline. Use the same so you'll be recognized by that name. And of course, using a photo that's identifiable all throughout your applying for jobs and resumes and people you meet. So they'll also refer the right person.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, another useful and meaningful episode, Damien. Thank you very much for being on. And thank the rest of you. If you have any questions, use this thread to ask or maybe even answer some of the questions that we kind of left in the open. I think we closed a lot of holes. And we could probably go on, but we'll come back to this eventually, because I think we may even see a change in the application process over the months, because remote work has brought in a different way of delivering communication, and of course, um, to deliver information. So, Elaine, you're welcome. She says, thank you very much. Great event. In the meantime, join Damien, follow him on his timeline as he shares content. Especially, you can ask him more questions about professionals in transitions, and that's also known as PIT. You can also follow me for the content I have coming up here in the next month. There's going to be a whole lot of it, so my time might be busy. I might even get penalized from LinkedIn for having so much come through. But that's the way that things are timed out. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Join us here next Friday, the Modern Job Search Checklist at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. Signing off. Peace in the Valley of Love. Okay, we are